Morning, Alex.
Good morning, Ezra. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. I guess good afternoon to you coming in all the
Oh
way
yeah,
across
actually,
the
yeah.
pond.
Good afternoon for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
lovely to have you on. Very excited for the show today. Laura is out this week for those regular guests. So we have our lovely and wonderful colleague Alex stepping in. Had the pleasure of getting to know Alex over the past 5 years here at Hootsuite, and he's a true expert in social media and in many other things in life. So Alex, would love to pass it over to you though to introduce yourself to the audience.
Oh well, thank you, Ezra. I mean, what an introduction now. Yeah, honestly, it's a real pleasure to be here. I've been following the show for such a long time now. So the moment you offered the opportunity for me to be a guest, I was absolutely thrilled. So thank you for having me. As you said, I've been at Hootsuite now for 7 years. So it's been quite the journey. I started here in our London office in 2016. I moved with the business to New York in 2018 and spent 5 wonderful years there. And I've just moved back to our London office where I'm working with our strategic accounts over here.
Wonderful. And especially over these years, Alex, you've specialized in the higher education space in social media, which to me is one of the most fascinating areas of social media. It's not a business in the normal sense. You're not trying to sell people products or do different things. It's a very interesting, unique space and tons of expertise, and we'll get into that later in the show here. But excited to get your take too on a lot of the updates and changes. Being in the space for well over 7 years, obviously lots has changed over the years in social media, and some fun updates to start to talk about today. So to kick it off, an exciting new announcement, a couple exciting new announcements on the Instagram side. One around Reels. So the classic Instagram carousel format, there's multiple little things you can scroll through. They're starting to test out within the Reels experience as well too. Personally, I find this quite interesting from even like a user experience standpoint, since when I think about Reels, it's very much I'm just flipping up through the screen as I go through. So having to change the habit and start to scroll left and right a little bit will be an interesting experience. For brands, I think it'll also be an interesting format to start to explore a little bit. I know with a lot of carousels, brands have gotten quite creative with those experiences, being able to create these longer format experiences across the flow there. So as this expands to Reels, it seems like a natural expansion from an Instagram platform, but it'll be interesting to see how it does get adopted. But we'd love to get your thoughts here, Alex. Is this something you're excited to share with the customers you work with? We'll love to get your thoughts overall.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's definitely an interesting one. I mean, if you look at it, let's face it, like everything TikTok does, Instagram's going to do everything Instagram does. TikTok's going to do. Those two are just fighting it out at the moment, particularly in the video space, where the fight for attention, engagement, obviously being so key on those video formats. So I think when you look at this announcement, you've seen how on TikTok they've been doing this for a little while now. It certainly does break up the scroll. I feel like in my experience, when you are, you're going through, as you said, you look at so many videos, something breaks it. It allows you to tell your story in another way. I'm personally, I'm a fan. I think anything that slightly breaks up what feels like something we're doing all day, every single day. And then, as I said, like having a new opportunity to tell your story. Yeah, I think it's a good thing. And as these networks continue to look at each other and evolve, it drives for better, customer experiences, which ultimately is more advantageous for brands, and everyone wins along the way. So yeah, pretty important announcement.
That I will say, it still never amazes me that more features can still come out from platforms like they're still not quite done with building what they're building, and that's always quite exciting. Another very interesting update from Instagram, and this one that a little surprising, but also not surprising in a sense, where Instagram's testing out limiting the number of hashtags that can be added to a post. I think in the past you could have up to 30 hashtags. I think they're limiting it down to 5. And from a contextual perspective to it, it's quite interesting. Just from a search visibility standpoint, hashtags are obviously great. Some people love to use a lot of hashtags. Some people like to try and put them in the comments. Instagram's actually come out and said, if you want to use hashtags, definitely use them in the post caption. That's where the search visibility is going to pop up there. If you put them in the comments, it's not going to get that traction. But it's interesting to see them trying to sort of create the restrictions, simplify this, create a better sort of end user experience where you don't just see a wall of a ton of hashtags as well. From a historical context, obviously lots of talk back in the days around Instagram hashtags. So curious to get your thoughts on this one, Alex.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, hashtags and the strategy around it is one, and a conversation that has gone on from the inception of it launching. And I feel like every year something changes, whether it's the algorithm, whether it's the network's recommendation. So it's obviously always worth checking and seeing their advice about why they're doing this. Like, I did some reading and research into it. What's interesting is what they were doing with this limit of potentially 5, which I think is fair, in my opinion. I think if you should really be able to, articulate your story and what searchable messages you're trying to get across within 5 hashtags. But that's actually what they do on threads as well. So as Meta continues to look to see what works on certain platforms they own over others, that limit on 5 existed in that threads world and is now looking to translate over to Instagram. So there's obviously some methodology behind it from their side. From a consumer standpoint, I think 5, again, is what you would want from a searchable, from an engagement standpoint. There is nothing worse than seeing those posts that are just covered in hashtags. In fact, really interestingly, I saw some commentary at the Super Bowl about Dove. And they released this really important campaign and message during the Super Bowl. I don't know if you saw it at all. Yep. It was about, empowering, young females in sports to, not have body confidence issues, an incredibly important topic. And I think they did really well, Dove, but there was actually a lot of commentary around how they complemented that really powerful video with a social campaign, which had so many hashtags on it. And there were some commentators in the space feeling like it kind of like it almost like overwhelmed and took away from the message a bit, because you're kind of just bombarded with so many different ways of trying to tell your story. And I guess the message here is sometimes simplicity and being to the point can be a better way of supporting your audience with your message.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also a good reminder when we think about hashtags and the opportunities here. We talked about this in the show over this past year here, but social search, social SEO is becoming more and more important for platforms. It's like that's where people go now to find information, and figure out a way to tap into that is going to be very powerful. Which hashtags too, having those very brand specific ones being quite important so people can find the content you want them to find in that organized manner, but also trying to find sort of those ones that maybe aren't too general, but are like not too specific, sort of in that happy medium where people can start to find that community and that niche and build around that as well too.
Yeah, definitely. Because you see it, don't you? You do see a lot of like hashtag hijacking, where someone's just trying to, they'll see the hashtag, they'll just put content that's completely non-related to it, just to kind of feel like either they're getting in front of the conversation, whether that's like for a positive, or sometimes not so much, just actually for like a detracting standpoint. So again, I think that's probably another reason why they're looking at that and thinking, let's try and limit it a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Love the term you use there. I'm going to have to steal that one as the term of the week here, of the great little hashtag hijacking. Continuing on here, one last Meta update to talk about this week, and we'll get into some other platforms. But a very interesting one around Threads. We talked about it a little bit last week as they were working up to launching it. Now they've launched trending topics in North America. Yes. I'm sure this will start to expand across the world. What's most interesting to me about this update too is how they've approached it, specifically in that users have to opt in for political trending content rather than that being the default and the norm. Threads talked a lot about this over the past few weeks leading up to this type of launch, where they're being very conscious about these types of functionality that they're adding to the platform to really try and create a unique and different space than what you see in Twitter, in Mastodon, and other networks that have developed, which do really focus a lot around a lot of the political conversation. I know Twitter, X, they're very big on like journalists and live news and covering events in the world in certain ways. And it's very interesting to see Threads try and take a left turn when everyone's taking a right here. I would love to get your thoughts though, in terms of like how this changes that platform experience, and even from like a higher ed or brand perspective, how this changes the approach to Threads for those teams as well.
Yeah, honestly, I really like the way that you frame that. Yeah, like taking a left when everyone's taking a right. Again, like you look at these networks and they're obviously always looking and trying to learn from the successes and then often the failures. And I think it's pretty clear with Threads that they've looked at that as one of the clearest like competitors to X, and they're doing a pretty good job with it. I think a lot of people were very, obviously it had one of the largest adoptions, like launches ever seen on a social network. But the reason why I feel a lot of people were so drawn to X, and maybe still are today, I think probably miss it a little bit for what it once was, but it was being part of a conversation in real time, wasn't it? It was being able to jump onto situations that were happening, whether it was in sports or whether it's pop culture or whether it's political, but those trending topics, it was allowing everyone to be part of a global conversation whilst in this like hyper connected environment and world we're in, whilst obviously just being like in their world as well. And I think obviously Threads misses that a little bit. So I can totally see why they thought, okay, let's try and create this, continued competitor to X, like give us that ability to kind of be part of a prevalent conversation in real time. I really see it. But the political thing is really interesting. Like you see it across all of Meta's kind of platforms. They made a very clear stance on trying to reduce, political and news content. And by not doing that on Threads, I think, probably a good thing. But equally, you could argue, is that limiting free speech? Is political commentary what people want to be actually communicating on, like platforms like Threads, because obviously it's something that impacts the world so much. So, yeah, I don't really, we'll have to see how audiences respond to it. But I think obviously from a competitive standpoint, it's a smart move. Interested to see how it evolves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Threads will probably be the platform of the year. What we'll be talking about the most over these next few months here, as they went through that explosive initial start and are starting to grow into what they're going to be in these early days as well too.
Yeah.
So one to keep an eye on, and it'll be interesting to see again how those conversations start to develop. Last, not necessarily an update, but a very great piece of research we did want to highlight here from LinkedIn. Just Connecting launched their annual deep dive on LinkedIn's algorithm for 2024. It's about 125 different slides going into depth around different content types, how they perform. Very great stats and analytics to get into here. Very interesting to see things like polls driving a lot of engagement, some of the different lengths of posts as well too. I won't steal the thunder from a lot of great people on LinkedIn who have done a deep dive on this, been able to put together some great summaries, but we'll definitely sort of put the credits in the comments here from the show. And I think for anyone on LinkedIn, whether as a creator or a brand, highly recommend this type of research to be able to dive in, learn a little bit more, and be able to use that as inspiration for your strategy. Curious to get your thoughts, though, Alex. Did you have a chance to look through the report at all, or pull out any key highlights for yourself?
Yeah, no, I did, Ezra. Honestly, what a report. I mean, 125 pages. It is extensive, but the insights are absolutely invaluable. As someone who uses LinkedIn as their primary social network, use it all day, every day. I would never call myself a content creator by any means, but certainly someone who likes to share, social commentary on what's happening in our space, what's happening in my industry, what's happening at Hootsuite. So I learned so much from this, from someone who uses it every day. Just this one report, some of the data that comes from it, it really makes you think. As someone, I'm always looking to try and see if I can share stuff that's genuinely of interest to people and maybe sparks a conversation. I had no idea how many different pitfalls I was falling into as someone who creates content. And that can be things like if you are doing video content, like making sure it's within 2 minutes, because anything longer, you get a negative hit of 75%. Don't put links into your posts, because if you're linking out of LinkedIn doesn't want that. They want to create a world where you live and stay and interact inside of that experience. And, I would often do that. I'd say, hey, I'd link out to an article. I'd link out to a case study of Hootsuite, whatever it may be. So there's just a couple of things that from a content standpoint, really recommend if anyone gets a chance to read through this report, to do it. But what I was really interested by, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is we see it every day. I'm sure you do. Our customers come and talk to us and they say, how do we make sure that our content, still stays relevant? It reaches our audience. It has the impact we designed it to be, because, organic being in a constant state of decline, and then paid being extremely valuable, but it is a pay-to-play space, right, Ezra? Like it becomes noisy, it becomes competitive. I saw a statistic on here that like completely, like, unfortunately, bad news for company content at the moment. Organic company content reduced from 7% on the latest update, and then LinkedIn ads went up from 5% to 11%. So in terms of like that reach and engagement, it's obviously going to be harder and harder for brands to get that organic content out there and to create those conversations and to have that impact. What's your thoughts? So have you seen that yourself? You know, that type of feedback coming? Does employee advocacy, is that an argument for that to be more prominent than ever in 2024?
Yeah, I think you summed it up perfectly on that front. And I think what's been interesting, both in the day-to-day and the companies we talk to, and sort of tracking the trends through this show as well, too, is that there's been a big, or a noticeable shift. I'd say maybe a slight one, but will be a big one overall in terms of how social plays into the companies. I think when you take a step back there, the death of cookies coming up later this year is going to change a lot of sort of the approach to social media, and it's become more of how do you build your brand, how do you carve out your space, how do you really create a clear voice of people wanting to come engage. Like, social's growing faster than ever, there's endless opportunities for people, and so having that clear point of view, defining who you want to be connecting with becomes so important. I think what you mentioned too, when it comes to company content, it's no longer just company pages that are relevant. Like, your executives, your employees, the people who are out there championing your message are part of your social experience when you think about it as a whole, and that should be encapsulated in what you do. So whether that's formal employee advocacy programs through tools like Hootsuite, or even just starting off and being able to say, like, here's our post, leave some comments, engage, start to share your own thoughts there, and find those employees like ourselves who like to get active and tell those stories and really help add fuel to the fire there. It can be so important. As mentioned, again, there's so much great research here. We'll be sharing it with many colleagues and friends, but definitely go and check out that full report. We'll wrap up the show here too, Alex, and topic I'm excited to dig into a little bit with you around how to use social listening in the higher education space, especially outside of the classic use case of crisis management or communications. Often universities, colleges, very focused on, okay, we want to make sure we're capturing any key messages, if there's any incidents on campus or the like. But social listening is a very powerful tool that can do a lot more than just that. I think we have to go too deep into it, but we'd love to get some insights in terms of like what you've seen be successful in the higher ed space.
Yeah, definitely. I was like, honestly, thrilled to get this question because it's one that I feel really passionate about. I actually just went up and spoke at the Brilliant Times Higher Education Conference on this topic very recently with Alistair Beach over at the University of Manchester, and we were talking about exactly this: how social listening is so much more than crisis communications. Although, as you said, extremely valuable. Having that finger on the pulse in key moments is absolutely critical. But when you actually look at the wider piece here, like, you have every university, every team in some capacity is going to have like an insights team. They're going to have a research team. And those are individuals that will use multiple different methods to compile information about how the university is represented, how it's seen, how it's understood, its brand reputation, what students care about, what prospective students care about. And these teams ultimately like dictate the strategy. They also can dictate the cost to study at that institution, that they can dictate the curriculum, right? This is like a huge amount of information that is out there. And they're using all these different techniques to get to it. But in fact, more often than not, they're missing the one that's right in front of them, which is social listening, which is social media. There is just a plethora of real-time data and information that students are willingly like wanting to put out there. They are expressing questions. They're inquisitive. They want to find out information. They're not afraid to share it, whether it's something about their experience about considering and researching that institution, whether it's about their time there, or even afterwards, like as an alumni, and they might be sharing, feedback and thoughts on how they can stay more connected to the institution. When's the next day of giving? And all of this information's out there. It's in real time. And just having social listening in place to be able to capture all of that and help that inform your strategy even just for an insight and research team, is absolutely invaluable. So, the conversation in the room that day is like, how do social media teams partner better with insights and research teams to be able to collaborate and share the story and basically use it almost as a content marketing engine and messaging engine as well? Because why wouldn't you want to listen to what people are saying about you and your institution, and then create messaging and create content around it that's going to ultimately aid them and support them in the future? It's a win-win. So, that's just one example. I've got a whole host more. I think about student recruitment and the student experience being so critical. An example from student recruitment is that I worked with this one institution who was set up a query listening to the entire conversation about going to university, like the enrollment process, like what students are saying when they're thinking about making those decisions and what matters to them. And what they found is that through one of those searches, they saw a prospective student who had made a list on Reddit saying, hey, I'm thinking about studying at these 5 different institutions, and I'm going to be in the West Coast of America during this time, doing this roadshow. Is there any other institutions I should be considering? And social listening picked that up. The social media team were able to look at that and say, this is an opportunity for us to engage responsibly and respectfully and say, hey, that's really great if there's anything that we can do to support your journey. And by the way, we've actually got an open day during this time, and if you could swing by and come and see the institution, we'd love to have you. And it's just like those little micro opportunities that could completely change the way that someone looks at you and goes, this is a university that cares. This is one that's invested in my experience. And it may be the difference between them studying with you or not.
Yeah. I think it's so true. And I think there's so many opportunities there, especially as this younger generation continues to move into that higher education space, being so social forward and that experience there. Like we talked earlier in the show about how search on social is going to be sort of the future for a lot of information finding, moving away from Google. And if you're not, we always talk about this from a social listening perspective, that the conversation is going to happen whether you're involved in it or not. And so it's better to be able to understand what that looks like and make those informed decisions based on that, for sure.
Yeah, completely.
Maybe just quick question here too, when you think about from a higher education institute perspective that hasn't set this up before, is thinking about this, dipping their toes, and is there any advice for those institutions who are looking to get started in this experience?
Yeah, definitely. I think it can almost, the reason maybe, in my experience, having worked with universities all over the world now, is that sometimes the hesitation comes from it feels like quite daunting. It's almost like, well, where do I begin? There's so much information out there. Like, how do I capture it? Do I have enough time? And I think the great thing about social listening is, depending on your capacity, your bandwidth, it doesn't always have to involve an investment in technology, although technology can absolutely help hugely in that area. But if you think about simple things, so there's two things. There's social media monitoring, and then there's social listening. And there is actually a clear difference between the two. So social media monitoring is obviously just making sure every comment, every DM, every exchange that happens on social on your channels is, picked up on. It's either engaged with or not, but the data is like collected, the insights from it are like taken on and shared. That's like the bare minimum. That is like your social media monitoring piece. Whereas social listening is the deeper conversation. This is where you're looking at everything, including every form of public conversation about you, not necessarily at mentioning you, but just mentioning your brand, an abbreviation of your brand, talking about your sports team maybe. It's across news sites, it's across blogs, specialist publications, it's across Reddit. And that's where you're looking at the real, like the huge internet conversation that's happening about you. And to do that manually can be quite hard work. And that's where more often than not, looking at technology to be able to support that and drive that efficiency, it's definitely recommended. There's some really brilliant tools out there who are industry experts, who are just like help aggregate everything and bring that to your fingertips. So I think if the use case is there, I definitely recommend looking at technology. But even things like setting up Google alerts, doing X searches, making sure that you have someone dedicated on your team just checking your channels every day, every week. That's stuff that, doesn't require additional investment and can be taken on tomorrow. And then maybe as that picks up and you start to see trends and you start to understand actually how big the conversation could be, that's maybe where you look to invest in maybe technology, or an agency to support you.
Yeah, I think great advice and a great roadmap to get started, and a great place to end the show here this week as well too. I want to say thank you again, Alex, so much for joining. Really appreciate your time here today, and wishing everyone a wonderful rest of their week.
Thank you so much, Ezra. It was such a pleasure to finally be able to join you.
Oh, yeah, we'll happily have you on any other day.
Oh, I love that, honestly. Well, thanks so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.